Welcome to the Megacast. I'm Tyler Keefe in the studios of our flagship stations, Civic Center TV and 89.3 Lakes FM. You can find Civic Center TV on Comcast Channel 15 and AT&T Channel 99, where you'll also find us in the Birmingham-Bloomfield area on Birmingham Area Municipal Access and in Southfield on City Cable 15. Join us on Channel 10 in Waterford on the Media Network of Waterford, live from 10 a.m. to 12 noon, Monday through Friday, and live to tape at 1 p.m. and 1 a.m. on Orion Neighborhood Television out there in Lake Orion and Orion Township. Find us also on the radio on 88.1, the BIF, a service of the Bloomfield Hills School District with 24/7 operations out of Bloomfield Hills High School, and online in a few different places on social media, on Facebook, facebook.com/CivicCenterTV15 and facebook.com/LakesFM. On our website, CivicCenterTV.com, by clicking on our Watch Live link or typing in CivicCenterTV.com/watch-live, or find us on My Michigan TV, otherwise known as MyMy. That's online, MyMyTV.com. MyMyTV.com, as well as on their free smartphone and smart TV apps, so you can take MyMy with you all across the state of Michigan and all around the world, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with original live programming as well as imported programming, all about the state of Michigan, made by creators right here in the Great Lakes state. Find more information about everywhere we broadcast live and live to tape, and find all of our shows and each individual interview on demand at CivicCenterTV.com/Megacast. Right next door to that page is our coronavirus page, CivicCenterTV.com/coronavirus. We're right at the top of the page. We have up-to-date information linked to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and the Oakland County Health Division's COVID-19 specific web pages, so you can keep updated on everything that you need to know about COVID-19 from reliable, factual, expert sources on the front lines of this pandemic. It's a good place to start if you want to, for lack of better terminology, do your own research, or if you want to keep up to date on information, you want to find information that's not going to have some nefarious backing behind it, or maybe from unreliable sources. Good place to start is from the CDC, the MDHHS, and the Oakland County Health Division, and their supporting materials from other experts on the front lines and a number of different professional sectors on the medical side, on the public health side, and more. And all of that's right at the top of our page, CivicCenterTV.com/coronavirus. Right under that, every day we scour news outlets from across the state of Michigan to find the most important articles that are making headlines all across the state of Michigan. We link to those articles. We provide a short summary of those articles in the words of the writers of those articles from those original websites, so that you can go there, read the articles in full, read their supporting materials, and should you have the means to do so, we highly encourage you to subscribe to those publications and support local journalism all across the state of Michigan. Making headlines today, our top story: more than 1,000 people rallied for peace for Ukraine in Detroit's Hart Plaza over the weekend. This is from the Detroit Free Press. Children draped in blue and yellow flags joined the chorus of more than 1,000 voices singing in Ukrainian at a gathering on Sunday at Hart Plaza in downtown Detroit in support for Ukraine amid an ongoing Russian invasion. Supporters spilled onto Jefferson Avenue near Joe Louis's monument, known by many as the Fist, as they waved the Ukrainian flags and chanted "Hands off Ukraine" and "Ukraine wants peace." Others had handmade signs reading "Stand with Ukraine" and "Stop War" in Ukraine, while motorists circled the intersection honking and waving flags in support. Organized by the Ukrainian American Crisis Response Committee of Michigan, or the UACRC, the event came 3 days after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the commencement of a quote-unquote special military operation in Ukraine, otherwise known as an unprovoked invasion. Jordan Filinenko, communications lead at the UACRC, and one of the event's organizers, said he was, quote-unquote, blown away by the large turnout, adding that the size of the crowd shows, quote, the importance and the gravity of what's going on right now within the community. Quote, it shows what you're watching on TV matters to people. Filinenko said, quote, it's not just something going on thousands of miles away. It's going to affect people right here. It's going to affect the United States, and we're standing here to ask for support, for people for their support, end close quote. Catherine Morozovska, a Troy resident with family in Ukraine, was adorned in Vinok, a traditional Ukrainian flower crown, and blue and yellow face paint. She said the outpouring of multi-ethnic support at the rally repeatedly brought her to tears. Quote, "It means the world to me and my family and every single Ukrainian out here that I've seen people from Georgia, from Kazakhstan, from America," and close quote. Morozovska said, Morozovska said in that quote. Natalia Melnzuk, a Livonia resident who lived in Ukraine for 7 years, agreed, wishing Ukrainians, quote, "the freedom of choice to decide what kind of governments to live under," and close quote. My apologies, the teleprompter combining several of those words. We'll continue on. The crowd, which met at 1 p.m. and marched on Woodward for a short while returning to Hart Plaza, stayed to linger in the winter sunshine, showing no sign of leaving a few hours into the gathering. Organizers handed out Ukrainian snacks and hot coffee to supporters in exchange for donations as traditional music played from loudspeakers. Although many attendees seemed to take comfort in a shared heritage and mission, they voiced feelings of anger, fright, and sadness at a Russian assault on Ukrainian independence. Quote, "It's not fair that the innocent people are getting killed just because one man is hungry for power." Morozovska said, quote, "I'm here today to honor my people and stand for what's right," and closed quote. Police presence was measured, with some officers seen standing with supporters for pictures. Detroit Police Department and Michigan State police officers focused primarily on traffic and crosswalk control. The rally was organized in part to fundraise, Filanenko said, urging supporters to, quote, "contribute," and close quote, "donations, medical supplies, whatever they can provide." A list of recommended charities is available at uacrisisresponse.org/donate. That's uacrisisresponse.org/donate. That link is in this article from the Detroit Free Press, linked on our website, civiccentertv.com/coronavirus. Also making headlines today at civiccentertv.com/coronavirus. Parents of 2 Oxford High School shooting survivors are suing school staffers as well as the school district. This is from the Detroit News. The parents of 2 students who survived the Oxford High School shooting in 2021 are suing staffers and the district, alleging that they failed to protect the youth and had reason to believe that the suspect would commit violence. The lawsuit, filed Friday in U.S. District Court, lists Oxford Community School District's Timothy Throne, their superintendent, Principal Stephen Wolf, Dean of Students Nicholas Ejak, and counselors Pam Fine and Sean Hopkins, as well as 3 unidentified teachers. It was launched by the lawyer for the mother of John and Anthony Asciutto, as well as the father of another student, Marco Vaccaro. Much of the filing centers on the events leading up to the accused shooter bringing a 6-hour handgun to the high school on November 30th of 2021. Among the allegations are that Throne and Wolf, quote, "had knowledge of the shooter's mental disturbance and dangerous ideations," and close quote, including after he allegedly left a severed bird head in the boys' bathroom and, quote, "posted countdowns and threats of bodily harm, including death, on his social media accounts," and close quote. The lawsuit accuses the superintendent and principal of downplaying the incidents and ordering others not to discuss them. It alleges Fine failed to notify police or the school liaison officer after learning the day before the shooting that the 15-year-old plaintiff allegedly had ammunition and a teacher saw him searching for more online. On November 30th, after a teacher allegedly spotted the alleged shooter's disturbing pictures in math class, including writing, quote-unquote, "blood everywhere" and depicting shooting victims, his backpack was not searched, the court filings allege. Quote, "Defendants who knew the relevant facts knew that he needed immediate psychiatric intervention and should not have been allowed access to the school and its students until the same could be obtained upon information and belief after allowing him to return to his classroom that the alleged shooter took his backpack to a school bathroom, loaded ammunition into the 9mm handgun, and commenced his mass shooting," and close quote, said attorney Robert Giroux in a filing in district court. District officials and the attorney representing the school did not immediately respond to requests for comment. The lawsuit recounts that John Asciutto and Marco Vaccaro were shot while walking down a hallway. Vaccaro was not struck and drove Asciutto to the hospital for treatment. Meanwhile, Asciutto's brother hid with more than 20 other students in a classroom for about an hour, according to the lawsuit. Quote, during that time, they heard someone using the handles at the art room door trying to enter, in close quote, Giroux wrote. 4 Oxford classmates, Hannah St. Juliana, 14 years old, Tate Mears, 16 years old, Madison Baldwin, 17 years old, and Justin Schilling, 17 years old, died in the attack. 6 other students and a teacher were wounded. The suit accuses the defendants of supervisory liability, state-created danger, and violating Michigan's Child Protection Act. It seeks an unspecified amount of damages. The shooting has sparked other litigation as well. Attorney Jeffrey Feiger filed a $100 million lawsuit against the district on behalf of survivors of the mass shooting in December, then amended it with 11 new counts against school officials. In response to that case, Oxford officials have denied, quote, they were negligent in any manner, in closed quote. Their lawyer also has called the allegations false and said his clients would claim that they are immune from liability. Mears' parents have also sued the alleged shooter, his parents, as well as 6 high school personnel. Meanwhile, the 15-year-old plaintiff remains at Oakland County Jail as he awaits trial on 24 felonies, including first-degree murder and terrorism. He has pled not guilty to all of those charges. His parents, James and Jennifer Crumbly, were ordered this week to stand trial for involuntary manslaughter in connection with the rampage. That article from the Detroit News on our website, civiccentertv.com/coronavirus. Lastly, making headlines nationally and here in the state of Michigan, there's new guidance. Most in Michigan can ditch their mask for now. That is from Bridge, Michigan. The federal government gave its blessing on Friday to make masks optional indoors for broad swaths of the nation, including for residents in 66 of Michigan's 83 counties. In a nod to the waning COVID-19 infections across the country, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on Friday suggested that mask wearing should be optional in counties where COVID-19 spread is low and hospitals are no longer strained by COVID-19 patients. Under the CDC's new 3-tiered risk system, which asks officials to look beyond just new case numbers. Most Michigan counties meet the quote-unquote mask optional guidance. In fact, about 70% of the U.S. population can now feel comfortable about going maskless indoors, though the CDC makes clear that individuals have different levels of risk. The tiers are based on 3 factors: a community's case rate, new COVID-19 related hospital admissions, and the number of beds occupied by COVID-19 patients. County risk levels can be found here at the CDC homepage. It's linked in the article on our website, civiccentertv.com/coronavirus, as well as a more detailed list of recommendations, including the recommendations to be vaccinated against COVID-19. All those additional links from this article and other links to the CDC, the MDHHS, and the Oakland County Health Division's COVID-19 specific web pages listed on our website, civiccentertv.com/coronavirus. Have a great show ahead of you today. Coming up next on the program at 10:20, we'll speak with Senator Mallory McMorrow, Democrat from Michigan's 13th district, representing Royal Oak. That'll be coming up next. At the bottom of the hour, we'll be joined by Paul Kubitschek, a professor of international studies and political science at Oakland University, who will give us some context historically and some context and some historical background on the conflict in Ukraine right now and what the implications of this could mean for the future of both Ukraine and Eastern Europe. At 11 o'clock, Dave Dulio, professor of political science at Oakland University, will talk about the political end of that, what the world's reaction may be to Vladimir Putin's unprovoked attack on Ukraine going forward, what action the U.S. has currently taken, analyzing that, the president's upcoming State of the Union later on this week, and more. At 11:20, we'll continue to talk about Ukraine with Eugene Budarenko, a Ukrainian and Slavic languages and literature professor at the University of Michigan. And then at 11:40, we'll transition. We'll talk about sports. The Detroit Pistons finally breaking their years-long losing streak to the Charlotte Hornets last night. We'll speak with Lauren Williams, Pistons beat writer at MLive Media Group at 11:40. That's all coming up next. You're watching and listening to the Oakland County Megacast.
72.7% of high school students get less than the recommended 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. This can cause pain, obesity, and can very negatively affect your mental health. When you have a consistent 7 to 9 hours of sleep every day, you get sick less often, lose more weight, and have better relationships with those around you. For more information about the dangers of sleep deprivation, go to sleepfoundation.org. This message is brought to you by the WBHS Digital Media Arts Program and 89.3 Lakes FM.
Can I ask you a question? Why did you get your kids vaccinated?
It was hard for them to social distance, to be isolated from their friends.
I want them to get back to school and sports games. So as a pediatrician, I recommend the vaccine to everyone I know.
The boys lost a former teammate and classmate who was only 20 years old. It's been a devastating year.
We want to get back to normalcy. Our daughter is really looking forward to being with her friends, being a kid.
It's the Great Lakes water, and so what people do ends up in our waterways.
Flushable wipes are just evil. They should be thrown away. They're impossible to destroy, and they can cause significant problems.
One of the main things when you're cooking is to not dump fats, oils, and greases down your drains.
They stick to the sides of pipes, they stick to everything they come in contact with. Don't put it down the sink.
There's one water, and it's ours to protect.
Welcome back to the Megacast. I'm Tyler Keefe. To learn more about everywhere we're broadcasting live and live to tape by visiting our website at civiccentertv.com and clicking on our Megacast link, where we have links to every single one of our partnering community television and radio stations right here in Oakland County, as well as statewide partners as well, including My Michigan TV, otherwise known as civiccentertv.com/Megacast. Joining us now is State Senator Mallory McMorrow. She is a Democrat from Michigan's 13th District, joining us on the Megacast. Senator, thank you for being with us today.
Hey, Tyler. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good morning to you as well. Thanks for coming on. So recently you tweeted saying, quote, "In Michigan, horror on the world stage is horror at home. I stand with our Ukrainian-American neighbors. The United States has always stood firm against authoritarian regimes and must stand together against Vladimir Putin, a man who will stop at nothing to watch democracy fail." Can you talk about the invasion of Ukraine and President Putin and why this is such a blow to everyone, including people right here in Michigan, despite this, the crux of this issue being hundreds of thousands of miles away from us?
Absolutely. I mean, it was hard the other day to wake up and realize the world is at war again. And whether or not it's here on our shores, it's the largest war in Europe that we've seen since World War II. And Michigan does have a significant Ukrainian-American population, including here in Oakland County, right here in our district. We have thousands of residents who have family in Ukraine. So it really is an attack on Michiganders and people who we love and who are our neighbors. But more than that, I think it points to the concerning rise globally that we've seen in this kind of retreat towards nationalism, authoritarianism, and this was it, right? This is the moment where we see Putin, I think, probably over assuming that is where the country is that we are retreating to nationalism. And it has been, as horrific as it is inspiring to see how many countries, people are rallying around Ukraine, the Ukrainians fighting for their lives, seeing 80-year-olds shine up to join the military, seeing families doing everything they possibly can and seeing the world rally around them. So it is still an absolutely horrifying moment, and we have to do everything we can to support Ukraine. But I think also reassuring that democracy is worth fighting for, and the world is going to come out to fight for democracy.
Of course, here in the state of Michigan, not a whole lot from a leadership standpoint can be done to directly address the conflict that's underway across the ocean over there in Eastern Europe and Ukraine because of the invasion by Russia. But that being said, as you mentioned, there is a quite significant Ukrainian-American population here in Oakland County and in the Detroit area. Heck, we had over 1,000 people down at Hart Plaza yesterday at a rally in support of those in Ukraine and stopping the war over in Ukraine. So for you as a leader here in the state of Michigan with our Ukrainian-American population, and given the response by our federal government in the immediate aftermath of Vladimir Putin and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, what it seems to be the reaction from your constituents here in the 13th District to the response from our federal government, and what sort of requests or information have they given you in terms of their opinion on the response? And is it enough? Does it seem to be enough in their opinion of an effort from us here in the U.S. to protect our allies in Ukraine?
Yeah, I will say, I've been overwhelmed by the number of constituents who have reached out and just said, number one, as your constituent, please make our stance clear that we stand with Ukraine against this horrific attack from Putin, this unwarranted attack. But then beyond that, people are just asking how they can help. I think that it's one of the things that we wanted to state pretty clearly in my statement is, although my role doesn't work on kind of foreign affairs in any regular basis, we do have a significant population here at home. So we are in touch with our Ukrainian community here in Michigan and in the district. We're taking a lead from them. A few of my colleagues and I are potentially working on a resolution to be introduced, potentially encouraging the federal government to do more, particularly around investments that have been made by Russian oligarchs here in the country, which is something that we can do. So there's more to come, but we are really taking the lead from the community directly, because these are Ukrainian Americans who do have family there, who are really leading the way for us and really telling me what they need me to do as their state legislator.
We're joined by State Senator Mallory McMorrow, a Democrat from Michigan's 13th district here on the Megacast, representing Royal Oak. Here in the state on more local issues and statewide issues, everyone will see from time to time petition seekers out on the town in public spaces, maybe even going door to door to get signatures for petitions. Sometimes those petitions are well-intentioned and maybe ever so slightly misinforming. Other times they may be deliberately misinforming. You and other colleagues of yours in Lansing are taking action on that, or at least attempting to take some action on preventing that, or at least giving some agency to those that sign these petitions to, if they come to realize that that this information may not be what they thought it was, that they can pull their name from that petition. Can you give us some insight on this legislation that you and your colleagues have been working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of to set the stage quickly is here in Michigan, I think that the petition initiative process is a very powerful tool that we have worth protecting. And it is one that not every state has, where residents can take action to put an issue on the ballot if they feel like the legislature is not taking action. This is the process by which we got the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission to finally take the drawing of our congressional and legislative lines out of the hands of legislators. It's also how we legalized recreational marijuana. But it's still a system that needs reform. There are actors out there who are abusing this system. There is currently a loophole in the way that our laws work, where the legislature has the first crack at a petition initiative. So if an initiative collects enough signatures, the legislature can choose to adopt that internally and pass it without it ever going to the ballot. And if that happens, that passes into law and the governor cannot veto it. So there are some groups that are using it intentionally to get to the legislature to put something forward that may not be the will of a majority of residents to get out of the governor's veto. But then there's also just the reality that there are more than a dozen potential petitions circulating right now. And it is legal right now for a circulator to lie to you about what it does. An example from a reporter from MLive was he was approached outside of a supermarket and a circulator said, "Would you sign a petition to help special needs kids in the state?" That was the question. No additional information. And most people would probably instinctually say, of course, yes, what do we need to do? But the reality was this petition was the petition that has been funded by the DeVosses and many other organizations to create school vouchers in Michigan, which would effectively cut the school aid fund by over $1 billion over the next 5 years and be a hurt to public education. So it's one of those things where we think that it's a powerful tool that needs to be held intact, but we have to protect the integrity of this tool. So we have a package of bills that would create penalties for organizations that are intentionally lying or misleading residents about what it is. And then my bill in the package would allow you, let's say, you were approached by this circulator who asked if you wanted to help special needs kids. You said, absolutely. You signed it. You went home later. Let's say you read a little bit more about what this petition does and you felt misled and said, I actually don't support that you would have the ability to request that your signature be removed from that petition so that you feel confident in what you're supporting as a voter.
It's an interesting balance because on one hand, the public and citizens do have a right to file petitions, to petition for legislation or to petition on a certain number of issues that you need to be careful in trying to keep that pure without preventing people from being able to have that ability to file those petitions. So on that note, what protections then are in place for those that maybe are putting these petitions out there? Maybe they are unintentionally misleading and people are signing them and eventually pulling that out. Is there going to be penalty then in that case if someone's not deliberately misleading people, or if simply those that are signing these petitions aren't reading that information before they're signing?
Yeah, and that's the balance that we tried to strike, right? I think that we have to protect this process, and we're not trying to eliminate the ability for people to put petitions forward because it is a powerful tool. But I had an interesting exchange with a petition circulator on Twitter who said, you know, I'm a paid circulator. It pays $30, $40 an hour. That's a great job. And said, you know, I support the idea of scholarships for students because the language that's used sounds really, really positive. But again, that is the initiative that would create a school voucher program that would cut the school aid fund significantly. So I had a back and forth with this individual and kind of explained a little bit more about what this petition does. And I think that highlighted a really important point, is that a lot of the people actually doing their circulating may not know. You know, some of these petition initiatives are really wonky, and unless you know the policy inside and out, you may, A, want a good job that pays well and you're good at doing it, and B, think fundamentally, yeah, I do agree with this. So that's why in our package, we want to make sure that the penalties are on the groups responsible for educating the circulators about what this is and being upfront about what it does and ensuring that the language is readily available, and not necessarily punishing people who are looking for good jobs who may unknowingly be sharing the wrong information and not doing so maliciously.
We're joined by Senator Mallory McMorrow from Michigan's 13th District here on the Megacast. She represents Royal Oak in the 13th District. And so just to continue on this topic, given that this legislation is being proposed, this is something that's in the works, may or may not end up becoming the letter of the law here in the state of Michigan, depending on where it goes from here. On the other side of things, while that responsibility should, in some way, shape, or form, be on those that are filing these petitions and are petitioning for those signatures to not misinform the public, there should also be some agency on the part of the people that are potentially signing or may have already signed these petitions to know what they're getting involved with, to know what they're signing, or at the very least look into it before they put pen to paper. What suggestions do you and other leaders in our communities have for those individuals that may have in the past been misled in these scenarios, or may have not been misled but simply did not read what they were signing?
Absolutely. And it's tough, right? Because usually you're approached when you're outside of a grocery store. You probably have your hands full. You might have your kid with you. I have a 1-year-old, so I know how hectic it is. And you may not have time to read and think about it. So my go-to, and what I'm suggesting everybody do right now, is don't sign anything when it's put in front of you right away. Ask the circulator if there's a website where they can go home and learn more information. Frankly, that's what I'm doing right now, even when people are asking me to sign things. And this is what I do for a living. So take the time. You know, you want to make sure that you feel confident that if your name is on something, that it's something that you genuinely support.
Yeah, and that goes not just for these petitions, but really for any document that you are signing in general, even if it's something you've signed before. And, you know, I went and got an oil change recently, and signing the paper after that to authorize that I'm making that transaction, I glanced that over at least before I sign it, just to make sure that there's nothing sneaky in there, nothing predatory that might be in there. And that's always something that's got to be on the side of those that are signing these documents. You've got to know what you're signing before you put pen to paper. But good to hear that there are some discussions at least about on the topic of if somebody signs something that they ultimately don't support and they figure that out, they can pull their name from that. While they have the right to, well, everyone has the right to petition on certain issues, and others have the right as well to sign in support of those issues. That ability to then pull your support should also be there. We're joined by Democratic Senator Mallory McMorrow from Michigan's 13th District on the Megacast. Learn more information on the Megacast on our website, civiccentertv.com/Megacast. Also, something else that you're working on here in the state of Michigan is Senate Bill 553. Now, this is addressing safe gun storage in the wake of the shooting at Oxford High School in November of last year. Can you give us a bit of an overview of Senate Bill 553 and what this aims to do in terms of producing a safer paradigm for gun storage here in the state of Michigan.
Absolutely. And one thing that I want to point out up front is while these bills were reintroduced in the wake of the Oxford school shooting, there are dozens of bills that myself and colleagues as part of the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus have been working on for years. I've been in the legislature now for over 3 years. My colleague Robert Wittenberg actually started this caucus, so it has been many years in the making of legislation to try to prevent gun violence and make sure that we're striking that balance of respecting the Second Amendment, but making sure we are encouraging responsible gun ownership and preventing horrible events from happening and taking lives. And, I think the school shootings, especially like Oxford, very naturally take the headlines, but there have been a handful of incidents this year alone where children have gotten a hold of guns and they're very curious. And it's leading to serious injuries. There was a child as young as 2 this year in the Metro Detroit area who got a hold of a firearm that was just loose in a home and set it off and injured himself. So what this package of bills would do would require that any owner of a gun, if you have minors in the household, that you are required by law to safely secure that firearm. That can be with a gun lock, that can be with a safe, but it really puts the onus on, if you're a responsible gun owner, you're licensed, you've got everything you need to be carrying that weapon, that you are the one who has ownership of it, that it is not getting into the hands of the wrong people. And we had students out just last week with March for Our Lives, an advocacy organization working to prevent gun violence that was started by Parkland students in the wake of the Parkland school shooting. And we had students, high schoolers, 15, 16-year-olds in Lansing. And one of the students told me that 2 of her friends this year alone have attempted suicide with a gun that they had found in their respective homes. So this is a really powerful tool. It possibly could have prevented what happened in Oxford. Obviously, there's a lot of egregious details about the Crumbleys and their treatment of this firearm, potentially buying it for him, not getting Ethan Crumbly the help that he so desperately needed. But it could also go a long way to prevent a lot of these senseless acts of violence, particularly those suffering from mental health challenges with PTSD, thinking about suicide, or just accidents that happen. So it's something that just has to be done.
You can learn more information by visiting legislature.mi.gov to read Senate Bill 0553 from 2021. Again, that is Senate Bill 0553, legislature.mi.gov to read that legislation, that proposed legislation in full that was proposed in June of last year. We're joined by Senator Mallory McMorrow, representing Royal Oak in District 13 here in the state of Michigan. Senator, just another couple minutes with you before we'll say goodbye today. Anything else at this time that would be important for your constituents or others here in Oakland County to know?
Absolutely. Just this past week, we introduced, my colleagues and I, a package of bills here to tackle the high cost of prescription drugs. We know this is something here in Oakland County that's important to constituents and is incredibly frustrating that it is constantly an issue that we have not seen Congress and the federal government act on. So we introduced legislation that would create a prescription drug affordability board here in the state of Michigan that would really replicate what we see with the Public Services Commission that currently operates to oversee utility costs. The utility providers have to submit their rate cases to the Public Services Commission for approval. And if there's an egregious rate increase, the commission has the power to act. So this would create something similar for prescription drugs and create a forum where drug manufacturers could come, they could defend, they could say why a drug is priced the way it is, but would potentially give us a very, very powerful tool to bring the maximum cost down for Michigan residents here. And it's something that multiple other states have done so far. And we are optimistic that this will be really impactful for our residents. And we're hopeful that it moves forward.
Senator, thank you very much for joining us, giving us some insight into legislation that you're working on, other things that are in the works as well, and some insight on our Ukrainian American response to what's going on in Ukraine with the Russian invasion on today's Megacast. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you, Tyler.
We're going to take a break here on the Megacast. On the other side, we'll continue to talk about Ukraine here in Oakland County from our perspective. We'll get a historical perspective on the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, on the background of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, from Oakland University International Studies and Political Science professor Paul Kubitschek. That's coming up next. You're watching and listening to the Megacast.
We may come from different organizations,
but we work together to protect the Huron River for everyone.
Neighborhood storm drains carry water directly to local creeks and streams. No filters, no treatment.
Storm drains also help reduce street flooding when it rains.
So clearing storm drains and the areas nearby of trash and leaves helps keep them for rain only.
It is easy to do your part by adopting a storm drain.
Find a storm drain, check it, and clear it every month.
So keep storm drains for rain only.
There's one water, and it's ours to protect.
If you are struggling to afford your internet bills during the pandemic, there's a temporary government program that may be able to help. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it provides up to a $50 monthly discount on your broadband bill to qualifying households. Find more information about the program, including if you qualify and how to enroll, at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit or call toll-free at 833-511-0311.
A public service announcement from 89.3 Lakes FM.
We as Michiganders feel connected to this resource in a way that I think is really powerful.
Conservation starts with a caring, committed community.
For me, it's peaceful to have a relationship with the river.
Every single one of us has a role to make sure that those waterways stay safe and healthy, being careful about what goes down the storm drain.
Just even eliminating some of your single-use plastic makes a difference.
There's one water, and it's ours to protect.
Did you know that nearly 3.31 million Americans don't get their annual checkup? Going to the doctor regularly is extremely important and is a crucial factor in maintaining good health. Make sure you are visiting your local doctor often and telling them about any health concerns you have. For more information, contact your local healthcare provider. This message is brought to you by WBHS Digital Media Arts Program and 89.3 Lakes FM.
Just about 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time last night, Russian forces began their invasion of Ukraine. It has escalated on several different levels since that time and is continuing to be ongoing. The president will make remarks at 12:30 this afternoon. It's expected some sanctions will be announced, but there's a lot of context to this battle that's now ongoing between the aggressors in Russia and those in Ukraine defending their sovereign nation. To get that context that's got a lot of history behind it and has a lot of politics behind it as well. We're joined by Paul Kubitschek, professor of political science and international studies at Oakland University. Paul, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate having you on. So let's just begin with the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine, of course, is an offset from the former USSR, from the former Soviet Union, became its own sovereign nation after the fall of the Soviet Union. And part of the context of it becoming a sovereign nation was sort of establishing itself as being non-threatening to Russia. They gave up their nuclear weapons in the late 90s to assure that this bordering nation of Russia that was going to have an ally in the West was not going to be a threat to Russia. So at this moment in time, given the circumstances of the last several weeks and certainly of the last 12 hours, 24 hours that we've seen with Russia now invading Ukraine, why is that territory, why is that sovereign nation of Ukraine so important to Russia?
Well, President Putin gave a very rambling speech this week in which he basically asserted that Ukraine is a fictional country, that it's an artificial creation, that it's been bound for centuries and should remain bound to Russia, whether that be part of the old Russian Tsarist Empire or part of the Soviet Union. And it seems rather clear that he has his sights on reanimating in some form a Russian sphere of influence throughout the former Soviet republics, which means putting them under his thumb or perhaps even incorporating them formally, as he did with Crimea, into Russia itself. There are, of course, historical, linguistic, cultural ties between the two peoples. But as you note, Ukraine is a sovereign country. The Ukrainians voted for independence in 1991. They have been an independent state now for some 30 years. And as a sovereign state, they have a right to make choices about their own policies. They do not have a military capability that is in any way threatening toward Russia. They have done nothing aggressive towards Russia itself. They certainly don't have the wherewithal to threaten Russia. And while they have made closer relationships with Western countries, one, that's their right, and two, they aren't going to be joining NATO or having U.S. troops or foreign troops stationed on their soil to potentially threaten Russia. That's just not in the cards. That's not something that the Ukrainian state is doing right now. So I think it's important to really emphasize that, yes, there's a tangled history. Yes, there are various claims and counterclaims, but the Russians clearly have violated international law and their own commitments to uphold the security of the Ukrainian state within its current borders. Russia agreed to this. Now they're going back on it because Putin has his own quasi-imperial ambitions.
Yeah, and again, Professor Kubitschek, just to provide a little more information, you mentioned the violation of international law with this invasion, with Russia invading the sovereign nation of Ukraine. Now, Vladimir Putin gave his own bogus justification that there were two certain areas of Ukraine, two certain regions of Ukraine that were declaring their own independence and had requested Russia's assistance as an excuse to give them a reason to send their troops into this nation. What is that? What is the context behind that claim? We know that in the past, particularly in 2014 with the incident in Crimea, that there were separatist groups that were more favorable to Russia that were involved in that incident. Is it a similar situation in those two territories that President Putin has claimed are independent and that Russia is supporting?
Those territories in eastern Ukraine in 2014, when Ukraine went through a period of political upheaval, the populations there were not happy with the incoming government in Kiev. They wanted greater rights. Some wanted to leave Ukraine. They found backing from the Russians. These regions border Russia. So Russians sent in forces to provide them with some military equipment to allow them in a moment of sort of political instability to kind of take over these regions, and it provided them enough military support that the Ukrainian military at that time was unable to restore their control over these regions. And since 2014, they've kind of been in this gray zone of declaring themselves separate. No one's recognized them as such until recently. There's been over 1 million Ukrainians who have left those regions to go elsewhere in Ukraine. They don't want to live in this sort of statelet that they currently have. But Putin is asserting control not only now over this region, but really over the entirety of the country. If you listen and read what he said the other day, it's not about just protecting the rights of ethnic Russians or something like this. It's that Ukraine has no right to exist, full stop. And, his ambitions may end, at least vis-a-vis Ukraine, to take over the entire country right now. I mean, the military operation could be working itself towards that as the ultimate goal.
We're joined by Paul Kubitschek, an international studies and political science professor at Oakland University, joining us on the Megacast as of 10:50 this morning, according to CNN's Al Kaufman and Barbara Starr. Roughly 100 Russian-launched missiles of various types had been shot into Ukraine in the quote-unquote initial onslaught. According to senior U.S. defense officials, at least 75 fixed-wing heavy and medium bombers were part of the initial attack on Ukraine last evening. And so it brings to question, with that kind of aggression from Russia from the onset, and with the strength and the might that they've come into Ukraine with, what sort of defenses does Ukraine have to be able to defend itself independently against this Russian attack, and then B, what kind of additional defense from their allies could they get militarily to help ward off or at least soften the blow of this initial attack from the Russians?
Ukraine has about 250,000 regular troops, and they have a national reserve they've called up. They're certainly better prepared than they were in 2014. We've given them some heavy military equipment, including anti-tank missiles. Their Air Force, by many accounts, has been rather decimated by some of these Russian attacks, but they do have some heavy equipment, men under arms, some sophisticated weapons and communications equipment, and we've been giving them military aid over the last several years to bolster their forces. We may give them more if this conflict, drags on. That's something to see what President Biden has to say. How much more physical material we can give them, how much more logistical support we can give them, how much more intelligence we may be able to give them. These are all open questions. I might add as well, I was recently, just before I joined you, I was on a briefing from the American Enterprise Institute in Washington talking about the latest of this conflict. By several accounts, actually, the Russian ground offensive, anyway, has run into trouble on several fronts, that there has not been sort of a quick victory that, easily overrunning the Ukrainian defenses. They've been holding up fairly well. By all accounts, it's a matter of time, right? I mean, Russia has more planes, has more tanks, has better training, better equipment. They can grind down the Ukrainian military forces, but it seems that it's not going to be an easy, quick victory for the Russians. That they have sustained some casualties. The Ukrainians have shot down some Russian aircraft. Ukrainian planes have gotten off the ground. So the Russian offensive has not been as successful, at least initially, as one might have thought. But I think we have to look and see what's going to happen in coming days and coming hours to really see, how far the Russians go and how far they intend to go.
And it becomes a difficult spot too for allied nations of Ukraine, for neighboring nations, for NATO, certainly for the United Nations as well, to try to intervene. Because once there is an intervention, especially a boots-on-the-ground intervention, an air intervention, a naval intervention, that brings another nation directly into that physical conflict of war in Ukraine. From other nations' perspectives, what is that flashpoint where there would be a necessity, a great necessity, for their direct involvement supporting the Ukrainians in warding off this attack from Russia?
Well, Putin has already warned the world that anybody that intervenes or interferes is going to have grave repercussions, right? And it seemed like he was even threatening perhaps nuclear war, right? I think what I'm going to keep my eye on in coming days is the Ukrainian-Polish border. How open is it? Are things moving into Ukraine? Or not? Is it just refugees coming out, or is equipment able to come in? Are the Russians going to move against it to try to secure it in some ways? Because that's going to be Ukraine's lifeline in terms of getting in any sort of equipment or any sort of aid, humanitarian aid for that matter, in. I think the other thing that you're going to see President Biden and NATO leaders talk about today is a swift commitment to send additional forces, large-scale forces, to Poland and the Baltic states to make sure they are well defended in case Putin does have ambitions beyond Ukraine. Because as matters stand, we don't have, if Putin wanted to take the Baltic states, he could. We don't have the forces there. And I think that there's going to need to be a major American commitment to ward off a conventional Russian attack on NATO. And as this is something we haven't seen for over 30 years. This is reshaping the world and reshaping American security interests literally as we speak.
You mentioned the threats, the very direct message that was provided by President Putin of Russia to the rest of the world in terms of providing that additional support to Ukraine, threats of additional force, potentially nuclear force. There's been kind of that focus on the nuclear weapons from Russia toward Ukraine and toward the rest of the world in that region for a number of years, and including just this morning at 10:25, CNN also reported that Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said that Russian forces were attempting to seize control of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Of course, that experienced a meltdown in 1986. Given that the nuclear weapon program in Ukraine has long since been discontinued, there are, as far as the international community knows, no nuclear weapons still in the arsenal of the Ukrainian armed forces. Why that focus on nuclear arsenals and on nuclear weapons or nuclear programs in Ukraine from Russia?
Let's not go down that rabbit hole, right? Let's not really focus on, frankly, Russian disinformation or far-fetched allegations that Ukraine is somehow harboring these weapons and using that as an excuse. That's an excuse that the Russians want to use. There's no evidence of this at all. They didn't even fabricate the evidence to kind of show it to the world or any sort of show trial or put it on their state-run TV or anything like this. This is grasping at straws to find any sort of justification they can to kind of confuse the world or muddy the waters in a situation, frankly, that is rather, I think, should be clear-cut aggression of the Russians against a country that was not threatening them. Full stop. From the Russian point of view, of course, they obviously have nuclear weapons, and it's unlikely that they would need to use them in Ukraine in this military sort of assault, but that obviously gives the Russians great protection and deterrence against any sort of action we might want to take against them. And so this is something that we really have to balance our desire, at least I hope our desire to help Ukraine, but realistically, you know, there's no demand to send American troops to the region to fight for Ukraine. And we need to be careful because the Russians, of course, have capabilities, you know, in terms of they've attacked Ukraine, cyber attacks. They could do the same here against us in a way that we're vulnerable, frankly, in a way that we weren't vulnerable in the 1980s against the Soviet Union, right? I mean, the world is different now than it was in the days of the Cold War. And in some ways, we're more vulnerable and we're in a weaker position.
We're joined by Paul Kubitschek, professor of political science and international studies at Oakland University, joining us on the Megacast. And so you've quite literally, you've written a book on the history of Ukraine, and it's had many different historical conflicts, of course, pre-Soviet Union, during the time of the Soviet Union, certainly in the immediate aftermath, and now in relation to the Soviet Union and to now Russia. Can you give us a little bit of an overview on those historical conflicts and how they kind of provide some additional context to the Ukrainians' perspective in this particular incident?
Well, Ukraine has been, you know, as I said, sort of a province of the Russian Empire from time to time, but also has its own cultural and political traditions dating back centuries. Part of Ukraine was part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Part of Ukraine was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. There have been, you know, Russian ties with Russia have been extensive, but you know, Ukrainian as a language or an identity has certainly existed for, you know, well over a century, right? I mean, there's been, and even during the times of the early days of the Russian Revolution at the time of 1918, there was a brief-lived, you know, Ukrainian republic. So there's always been sort of ambitions for a Ukrainian political identity. And the Soviet Union did create a Ukrainian republic based upon Ukrainian ethnic national identity that existed there. I mean, they recognized the fact that there were Ukrainians there. I think it's fair to say as well that you know, listeners may not know this, but after during World War II and even after World War II, into the 1950s, there were Ukrainian nationalist partisans that fought against the Soviets, not only during World War II, but after the war ended. They took up arms and fought against them into the early 1950s. And there's memories of that, particularly in Western Ukraine. And people are talking today that if Russia, you know, were to occupy the country or try to occupy the country, that you would see large-scale partisan guerrilla urban warfare that may end up, you know, making Ukraine the modern-day equivalent of the Soviet Union's experience in Afghanistan.
We're joined by Paul Kubitschek, international studies and political science professor at Oakland University, on the Megacast. Paul, just another few minutes with you before we'll say goodbye. At this point in time, what are some? It's important to also focus on the Ukrainian people themselves and what aid may be available to them, both within their own sovereign nation and within neighboring nations or from neighboring nations, for those that are in cities that are under attack, particularly cities in the immediate border area of Russia and certainly those close to the capital of Kiev. What sort of aid is there from other nations for these particular individuals that may be refugees as this conflict continues?
Well, we're going to see how this develops, right? You're already seeing people fleeing some of the cities, right? Whether they're going to go, visit family, or they have another place potentially to go, right? Again, that's why that border with Poland, I think, is so crucial to get aid through if it comes down to that. If that border's closed somehow, it could become a very ugly, very, very difficult situation. I mean, it's winter, it's cold. Will there be food? Will there be heating? Can these people be provided for? There is a risk of a great humanitarian catastrophe, depending upon how far the Russians go and what they choose to attack. They have not attacked yet electrical infrastructure, for example. So there is basic infrastructure present, but other cities in Ukraine could be overwhelmed with refugees or displaced people, and finding aid for them, finding a place for them to live and accommodating them is going to be a major challenge, certainly. And again, you would count on open borders to allow aid to come through. Whether that's going to actually happen or not if Russia takes over the country is a very open question.
Paul, thank you very much for joining us, giving us some more insight into the backstory behind this current conflict, this, frankly, war that's been declared by Russia on Ukraine, and, of course, Ukraine's history as well, dealing with Russia in the times of the Soviet Union, in the wake of the fall of the Soviet Union, and some of the historical contexts as well that have led to Ukraine's sovereignty today and informed their sovereignty today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I welcome the chance, but it's a very sad day today. It really is. But thank you for having me.
People are getting out to walk and bike in higher numbers. More vulnerable road users and higher speed traffic can be a dangerous combination. Crash severity has increased, so if you're driving, be sure to slow down and look for people. There's no need to speed. If you're biking, ride with traffic. If you're walking, avoid stepping into the road if possible. If you have to walk in the street, walk facing traffic. Learn more at walkbikedrivesafe.org.
When times get dark, we can't see the help that's all around us. When you don't know where to turn, let 211 be your guiding light.
211, how can I help you?
Our guides are ready to connect you with the help you need. For help with food, healthcare, mental health, and other resources. Call 211 or visit 211.org. 211. Get connected, get help.
Parents do a lot of worrying. Get your kids caught up on childhood vaccines to protect them from these 14 preventable diseases, and you'll have 14 fewer things to worry about. Vaccines are safe and effective and save lives. So let's get caught up on vaccines and worry about something else. Get the facts at ivaccinate.org.
We may come from different organizations,
but we work together to protect the Huron River for everyone.
Most of the pollution that goes into our rivers is carried by rainwater that flows off of roads, parking lots, and rooftops.
The leaves and bark of a single tree can retain a surprising amount of rainwater. Depending on its size and species, it could be 100 gallons or more.
It is estimated that an urban forest can reduce annual runoff by up to 7%.
Here's one thing that we know can help keep our water clean.
Plant a tree.
Plant a tree.
Plant a tree.
There's one water, and it's ours to protect.
One of the things you can look for in your friends is a change in behavior. These can be big changes, they can be small changes in mood, physical appearance. They may be sleeping less or sleeping more, drinking more, or their eating patterns may be different. One big change that can be pretty obvious is change in motivation. Do they no longer want to play basketball? Do they no longer want to play video games? Now that we're spending more time online and in virtual settings, it's really important to pay attention to the language that your friend is using and the words they're using to communicate.
So when we text our friends, are they taking longer amounts of time to respond? Are they not responding at all? You don't have to be an expert to try to recognize these signs. The second that you feel it in your gut and that you're concerned, that's the second to have the conversation and open the door to what might be going on.
Whatever gets you talking.
Welcome to the Michigan Megacast on your radio homes for the show, 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake and 88.1 WBFH Bloomfield Hills. Learn more information about the Michigan Megacast by visiting our website at civiccentertv.com/megacast. Joining us now is a political science professor and the director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University. Once again, Dave Dulio with us on the Megacast. Dave, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate having you back. So let's start here locally in Michigan. Of course, redistricting, that process is complete. The work of the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission is, at this moment in time, all the way through. However, multiple lawsuits have already been filed by those on both sides of the aisle against the Redistricting Commission over their new maps, including recently a group of Republicans filed a lawsuit over the districts stating that, quote-unquote, communities of interest, including counties, cities, and townships, and that the commission arbitrarily split them up into separate districts in violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Can you give us some insight into both the argument behind this lawsuit from those on the Republican side of the aisle, what they're arguing was violated by the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, and whether or not this particular lawsuit has legs? We knew that the last lawsuit we saw that was from more Democratic-leaning leaders here in the state of Michigan did not have many legs behind it and go very far. What about this one?
Sure. I think whether or not it has legs is to be determined. The courts, and it's important to note that first lawsuit that you mentioned, filed by the Democrats, the Detroit caucus, that was in state court. The one that you're referencing now was filed in federal court. Right. And there's another component to it, and let's deal with that one before we get to the communities of interest piece. But the one that's in federal court, filed by a group of Republicans, has an issue about population equality at its core. And there is a long line of Supreme Court case law that says states have to try as best as they can, and this is using layman's terms, since I'm certainly no attorney, states have to do as best as they can. I think the phrase in the decisions is as nearly as practicable, have to get to population equality so that one person's vote in one congressional district has the same power as another person's vote in another congressional district. And if population numbers are off by too much, that is the violation of the Equal Protection Clause. So, and as I said, the Supreme Court has held a very narrow interpretation of that. We'll have to see what the courts do in this one, whether or not the deviations in population from one congressional district to another are enough to get the maps overturned. The other component you mentioned is the violation of communities of interest and tacked onto their city, township, county lines. It's interesting, however, that there are a number of criteria in the constitutional amendment adopted to Michigan's Constitution in 2018 that brought about the Citizens Redistricting Commission. And these criteria are in order as to how the commission has to approach drawing the lines. And at the top of the list are things like the U.S. Constitution and federal law, things like the Voting Rights Act. And then come some new ones for us here in Michigan, including, in order, communities of interest, partisan fairness, and then a couple others that we'll skip over. And then at the bottom are existing political boundaries, the county, city, township borders that you mentioned. So it'll be interesting to see how the courts deal with this, given that communities of interest is high up on the list of things that the commission has to pay attention to when it's drawing lines, but those existing political boundaries are last on the list, right? So how does the court consider places like, Warren, for instance, Sterling Heights, that are split up into a number of different state house, state senate, and congressional districts? Oakland County is split up 5 or 6 different ways in the congressional map. So what is a community of interest to the courts? Does it overlap with things like county borders? We'll have to wait and see.
We're joined by Dave Dulio, professor of political science at Oakland University, also the director of its Center for Civic Engagement, joining us on the Megacast. Also on the topic of redistricting, we're seeing on both sides of the aisle as well some really interesting matchups coming up between candidates who are either going to be running in the same district as another candidate that was in a nearby district in the previous map drawing, or will be moving to different districts, or will be running in a different district here in the state of Michigan. What's really interesting at the federal level, U.S. House of Representatives race here in the 11th district between Andy Levin and Haley Stevens, with Representative Stevens saying that Representative Levin running in that district is abandoning his current constituents. Can you talk a little bit on that issue and why we're seeing, or maybe what might be the justification politically or just overall for Andy Levin to be running in this district instead of moving into another district and running in that district, or same thing for Representative Stevens, and why this clash seems to be so powerful here in Oakland County?
Sure. I think that there are a number of factors, but at the start, I think let's acknowledge that it's early in this process, early in this primary, and the gloves are starting to come off between Representative Stevens and Representative Levin, and I'm sure that they will have a not a fierce, but a spirited primary battle to see who is going to move on to the general election in the new 11th. Why Representative Levin is running in the 11th rather than the Macomb County centric district, the 10th, that's a question for him. But let's be clear about it, right? There's no rule in Michigan that says you have to live in the district that you want to represent. That is something that candidates have done for years and years and years, not lived in the district that they are that they want to represent. I think so. There's that, and in fact, Representative Levin lives in Oakland County, not Macomb County, so you could say it's more of a homecoming for him. I also think that there are political calculations. The district that is Macomb centric, where John James is going to run. He's already announced that. We're waiting for the Democrats to sort that out. And it appears there's potential that a newly retired judge, Carl Merlinga, might run on the Democratic side there. That would set up an interesting race. But that's a Republican-leaning district, probably by 4 or 5 points. The 11th is a Democratic-leaning district, probably double-digit points, right? I mean, so it's a much friendlier district for Democrats, but it's, as I said before, it's also a bit of a homecoming for Rep. Levin. If he does win here, he would represent his home county.
We're joined by Dave Dulio, professor of political science at Oakland University and the director for its Center for Civic Engagement. Dave, this week the president will be making his first State of the Union address. We've heard, of course, in the last couple of days that that address has been shifted in large part to be focusing on the crisis in Ukraine and its effect on national politics and world politics. As we're seeing, of course, sanctions have been put on both the Russian government and oligarchs that are connected to Vladimir Putin, on Vladimir Putin himself. Those only go so far, but those also affect the world economy at a time when inflation is high, gas prices continue to rise and are affecting the pocket of everyday Americans. And of course, those sanctions also heavily going to affect the pockets, and already are, of everyday Russians, those that may disagree with the actions of their president. How critical for President Biden's future, given that his approval ratings are already at such a low spot right now, is this State of the Union setting the tone for going forward, given the crisis that's ongoing in Ukraine?
Yeah, Tyler, I think that this is arguably the most important speech of Biden's political life.
Yeah.
You look at the litany of issues that are confronting the United States. You mentioned inflation, the economy in general, gas prices. You've got COVID hasn't gone anywhere, right? I mean, maybe we're coming out of the pandemic and moving into endemic, but it's still there, right? You've got a new Supreme Court nomination that just was made, and the confirmation process is going to heat up. You've got sinking approval ratings, as you mentioned, for President Biden. He's barely above 40%. In fact, he's right about where President Trump was after a year in office in 2017. You've got a country that is deeply polarized, deeply split. Layer on top of that, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's an election year, right? And an election year in which all signs point to Democratic candidates taking a beating at the ballot box. This is a critical point in time for the country, for Joe Biden's presidency, with all of that taken into account.
We're joined by Dave Dulio, professor of political science at Oakland University, joining us on the Megacast. Dave, I want to give you a few minutes before we do let you go to talk about anything that may be coming up at the Center for Civic Engagement. Of course, always great discussions going on over there, but between those of all different political affiliations on a number of different issues. Can you give us a preview of what's coming up?
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. We've got all sorts of stuff happening this month. Three things in particular. One, you had a colleague of mine on just prior, Paul Kubitschek, talking about Russia and Ukraine. We're going to include Paul as well as a couple other colleagues from the political science department to talk about crisis in Ukraine. On March 10th, at noon, we're going to have a virtual session where we call it office hours, where we feature and highlight faculty experts. So Paul Kubitschek, Pete Trumbore, and Christian Cantier are going to talk about U.S. foreign policy, international conflict, the crisis in Ukraine, really, and where it's been, where it might go. We're also going to welcome two Ukrainian faculty members to participate in that, one from biology and one from art and art history. So folks can tune in for that. A couple of weeks later, we're going to circle back and talk about domestic politics. And then on the 29th of March, we're going to host in person two former U.S. ambassadors, Ambassador David Fisher and Ambassador John Rakolta. Ambassador Fisher was in Morocco, and Ambassador Rakolta in United Arab Emirates. They're going to come and talk about the Abraham Accords, which are the historic peace agreements between some Arab countries and Israel that were brokered by the United States in 2020. So they're going to come and talk about the Abraham Accords and the possibilities for peace in the Middle East. Those are going to be, as I said, in person, but you can also join virtually. It'll be a hybrid event, March 29th, 7 p.m. And if folks can't find the information on our website, they can email me directly. Happy to point folks in the right direction for any and all of those.
Dave, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Todd.
Appreciate it. Again, March 10th, the office hours discussing the crisis in Ukraine from the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University. Learn more information on the website, oakland.edu/poli-sci/CCE. That's oakland.edu/poli-sci/CCE. On the other side of the break, we are going to continue to talk about Ukraine. We'll be joined by University of Michigan Ukrainian and Slavic languages and literature professor Eugene Bodorenko on the Megacast. That's all coming up next. You're watching and listening on our family of TV, radio, and other media outlets.
When times get dark, We can't see the help that's all around us. When you don't know where to turn, let 211 be your guiding light.
211, how can I help you?
Our guides are ready to connect you with the help you need. For help with food, healthcare, mental health, and other resources. Call 211 or visit 211.org. 211. Get connected, get help.
Joining us now is a lecturer at the University of Michigan, lecturing in Ukrainian and Slavic languages, and also is part of the Ukrainian American Crisis Response Committee of Michigan. Eugene Bodorenko joins us now on the Megacast. Eugene, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for taking the time to speak to me.
Appreciate having you on. So first, can you tell us about the work of the crisis response team that you're part of, the Ukrainian American Crisis Response Team of Michigan, and the role that it's playing in working with our leadership here in Michigan and in the U.S. to address the truly harrowing situation over in Ukraine with the invasion from Russia?
Yeah, so the Detroit area has a Ukrainian community that is about 50,000 strong, not to mention that in general, you know, we have received a lot of support from people completely outside of our community, because I think that the situation is appalling, and, you know, it's the biggest, I think it's the biggest crime on the international world stage since 1939. But to get to your question, the Ukrainian community here and this organization, which is essentially the work of the entire community coming together, we're engaged in advocacy, so trying to get the word out about what is going on. Once again, trying to stay ahead of that Kremlin propaganda narrative. We also organize within the community to help with some humanitarian aid, such as medical supplies and things of that nature. And unfortunately, we at this point are having to seriously discuss mass numbers of refugees.
Yeah, refugees is certainly going to be the big humanitarian question going forward in the interim and in the immediate, because of the situation over there in Ukraine, where Russia has been able to make ground quite quickly from its initial onslaught that began about 9:30 p.m. on Wednesday evening here in the U.S., which was early Thursday morning local time in Ukraine, and especially as they're pushing toward the capital of Ukraine in Kyiv. But in terms of those that are there, that are in Ukraine right now, being that we have such a strong Ukrainian population here, where they have friends, they have family, that have other people that are in their lives over in Ukraine, we hear so much about the Ukrainian perspective from the military side of things, dealing with the Russian invasion. For those individual everyday humans that aren't in the military but are living in Ukraine and are living in these cities that are being attacked, what has your committee and the Ukrainian community here in the Metro Detroit area and the state of Michigan heard from those on the front lines over there in Ukraine about just how treacherous the situation is in the homeland?
Well, look, it's no secret that the Russian military is not discriminate in what it shells and what it bombs. The initial sense of disbelief that this is happening has given way to anger and determination, or increased determination, since it was always there. Folks, you know, I'm from Kyiv, so people are spending a lot of their day in the subway, which is designed also as an air raid shelter. It's quite an expansive system, and a lot of people can fit down there. Air raid sirens are can be easily heard. There has been direct bombing of Kyiv. Actually, 2 cruise missiles and a plane attempted to strike targets somewhere in central Kyiv. We're not sure where because Ukrainian anti-air defenses knocked them down. But you can imagine that for civilians living in such a situation, I mean, the goal is survival, right? Right now, it's collective survival. People are absolutely livid at what is going on. I think that there has been a lot of, from the Russian side, there's a lot of talk of our common cultural ancestry and whatever. I think that whatever grain of something remotely to truth was there before, it has certainly gone now. Nobody in any Eastern Ukrainian city, no matter how pro-Russian they were, is going to ever forget being bombed and shelled in the middle of the night. And it's simply a wanton act of aggression. And a lot of, when I say 1939, Ukrainians are very well versed in the history of the 20th century. Ukraine suffered about 8 million deaths during World War II. So it's when we say 1939, the people know what that means.
We're joined by Eugene Bedorenko, U of M lecturer in Ukrainian and Slavic languages, as well as and literatures, as well as part of the Ukrainian American Crisis Response Committee of Michigan, joining us on the Megacast. And so, in the committee's discussions with the community here in the state of Michigan, with our leadership in Michigan at the state level and at the federal level. And seeing the response and the initial response from the federal government yesterday, with President Biden announcing sweeping financial sanctions on the Russian government and those in power in Russia, not specifically Vladimir Putin's finances, which was a part of the criticism of those sanctions. In addition to those sanctions, is there anything else that's being discussed in terms of providing additional aid to those on the front lines in Ukraine trying to ward off this unprovoked attack from Vladimir Putin's cronies in Russia?
Yeah. So it's, first of all, let me say it is Vladimir Putin's cronies in Russia, and it's not necessarily the Russian people, right? But let's be clear that Putin has been in power for 20 years and has been quite popular. So I think there is a degree of culpability that Russia as a state bears, not just Putin and his administration. But in terms of what can be done, right? Look, the sanctions were and should have been to a rational, actor in Putin's place, should have been in deterrence enough. At this point, punitive sanctions are definitely the right way to go. I mean, it's incredibly important to make, first of all, the Russian elite, but also just the average Russian citizen feel the consequences of their country going way out of bounds of international law, right? I really urge us that we had no qualms cutting off trade with Germany after its invasion of Poland, right? We had no qualms about any of this, and I don't think we should either in this case. Furthermore, to help people on the front lines, look, sanctions are great, but they're clearly not enough at this point. And unfortunately, it is my professional opinion that we live in a moment where we are looking at a big conflict is staring us in the face with Russia, right? And the longer it takes for us to look up and admit that reality, the worse the outcome may be. I really think that it's time that we use the U.S. Air Force cruise missiles and drones to take out Russian targets within Ukraine. I think that military action is the only thing that will stop Putin at this point. The Ukrainians are putting up a hell of a fight. And to me, if nothing is done, it would be as if in 1939, the world just sort of looked at Hitler invading Poland and said, oh, okay. right? It's an uncomfortable thing to say, and I'm not hawkish. I've never advocated for war or invasion in my life. In fact, I've been rather happy to be able to do without for most of my life. But I believe that this is one of those moments where push has come to shove, and we have to stand up.
We're speaking with Eugene Budarenko, U of M lecturer in Ukrainian and Slavic languages and literature, as well as part of the Ukrainian American Crisis Response Team of Crisis Response Committee of Michigan, joining us on the Megacast. We see the images that are coming in from our national news outlets here in the United States, from national news outlets in other allied countries in NATO and surrounding Ukraine, and even from a video from in Ukraine from soldiers and citizens through social media. And we see the extent of these attacks, the brutality of the attacks, just thus far as Russia is putting in their initial strategic attacks, while also, of course, having massive collateral damage in major cities all across Ukraine. We see that as very severe. We know that the support from neighboring nations, particularly from NATO nations immediately bordering Ukraine and bordering Russia, has not been to your satisfaction. Certainly not to the satisfaction of those in Ukraine. But the Ukrainians are fighting back. The Ukrainians are willing to lay their lives on the line for their country, for their neighbors. That being said, the Russian military is one of the handful of most powerful militaries in the entire world. Are the Ukrainian people on the front lines confident, from what you have discussed with them, that they can ward this off long enough to have that international support before time runs out and the Russians overtake their nation, their country?
I'm really glad you asked that question. I want to, in 1941, Winston Churchill gave, I'm sorry, not in 1941, during the Blitz, Winston Churchill gave a speech in which he said, we will fight on the beaches, we will fight on the landing zones, we will fight in the streets, we will fight in the fields, right? I'm paraphrasing here. We'll never surrender. And that is the average Ukrainian fighter's outlook. Most people in Ukraine, you have to understand, there is no plan B. There is no backup country to go to. The sense is that if Russia comes in and they complete their military objectives, they will go about basically purging the Ukrainian cultural, political, and economic elite to basically put Ukraine into a position of an entirely dependent client state like Belarus to the north. So in this regard, Ukrainians really have appreciated what they've seen as the stark contrast between their country, where they have elections every 5 years to see if they've had, to give you the vibrance of Ukrainian elections. There's only been one 2-term president over the last over its entire existence. So the political climate is quite vibrant. Compare this to Belarus, which has had the strongman leader since 1994, when I was 6 years old, right? And Putin, who has been in power since 2000. Ukrainians see this, and Ukrainians see the kind of the lack of civic freedoms that increasingly is the case in Russia and Belarus. Versus the sorts of freedoms that they have been allowed to have, and they will fight tooth and nail and to the death. The question isn't can they hold out? The question is, how many more have to die before we do something?
We're joined by Eugene Budarenko, U of M lecturer in Ukrainian and Slavic languages and literatures, and part of the Ukrainian American Crisis Response Committee of Michigan. And as we are looking on, Ukrainian Americans and other Americans as well are looking on in horror at the actions of the Russian government, at this at this barbaric invasion of a sovereign nation in Ukraine, and seeing the damage that's being inflicted on the cities, the death toll that continues to increase by the hour amongst military in Ukraine and average everyday citizens in Ukraine as well. Much like with other tragedies where there is a mass amount of death, the immediate response tends to be a lot of we're thinking of you, our hearts are with you, our thoughts and prayers are with you. And like you said earlier, so many have already come to the right hand and the left hand side of the Ukrainian American community to offer their support at this time. From your committee, from your friends and neighbors in the Ukrainian community, Ukrainian American community here in Michigan, what can we do as your neighbors, as your friends, as your colleagues, as strangers that just want to do whatever they can to help at this time, to help your committee push forward in the American response to what's going on in Ukraine?
Look, I think the important thing here for the average American is to understand the moment that we are living in, right? We do appreciate all of the support when people do say that they are praying for us, that they're thinking of us. Look, this does, of course, matter a great deal. I will not say anything to disparage that, and I'm touched by the number of people that have reached out to me. At the same time, I would urge them to add to this, writing to their elected representatives and saying that, look, we should send humanitarian assistance and we should continue to send military aid, but please send our planes and our missiles.
Eugene, please continue.
Because if there was ever a morally justified time to intervene and a morally necessary time to intervene, it is now.
We're joined by Eugene Bodorenko, U of M lecturer in Ukrainian and Slavic languages and literature on the Megacast. He's also part of the Ukrainian American Crisis Response Committee of Michigan. Eugene, just a few more minutes before we will need to say goodbye today. Anything else that you would like to say at this moment in time on the war that's being undertaken in Ukraine, on the American response, or anything else about Ukraine to the public here in Michigan?
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone that Ukraine is a country that has played by the rules of the international community the whole time. Upon declaring independence, they immediately committed to getting rid of what was the world's third largest nuclear arsenal. They did so entirely in exchange for not a treaty guarantee, but a guarantee of the recognition of their borders, which have been violated, without any regard. Ukraine has consistently put itself through several successive administrations, has kept a westward course. It is in the Ukrainian constitution. It is inscribed in the Ukrainian constitution that Ukraine seeks to join the EU and NATO. They are a Western society. Ukrainians being bombed, right? If you think that this is a Ukraine-Russia thing, this is no different from France being bombed, from Germany being bombed, from any place in Europe. This is a European country. And as much as Vladimir Putin doesn't want to think it and doesn't want to admit it, he is currently at war with Europe, and he's at war with the democratic world. And it is imperative, and it is imperative that we help Ukraine by any means necessary. It would be a generational mistake not to.
Eugene, thank you very much for joining us and discussing a very complicated issue that's affecting not just those in Ukraine, but their friends, their family, and others in their life right here in Michigan. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on the program. I thank you very much.
If you are struggling to afford your internet bills during the pandemic, there's a temporary government program that may be able to help. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it provides up to a $50 monthly discount on your broadband bill to qualifying households. Find more information about the program, including if you qualify and how to enroll, at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit, or call toll-free at 833-511-0311.
A public service announcement from 89.3 Lakes FM.
Whether you're the city,
the county,
or the Huron River Watershed Council.
We work together to protect water resources for everyone.
Most of the pollution entering our rivers is carried by rainwater that runs off roads, parking lots, and rooftops.
A rain garden helps catch stormwater runoff.
Rain gardens and their plants help dirty runoff soak into the ground.
You can do your part to help keep our water clean.
Learn about rain gardens and native plants.
So consider a rain garden in your home landscaping.
Catch the runoff with a rain garden.
There's one water, and it's ours to protect.
I couldn't breathe at all. There was lots of talk about putting me on a ventilator. I thought I was gonna die. I was 39 weeks pregnant and had a scheduled C-section. During that time, I got COVID and was hospitalized for a month. I had a blood clot in my lungs. It caused me to go into right-sided heart failure. I was really scared. I kept texting my husband and my mom, telling them how scared I was, and I was worried that he was gonna grow up without a mom. And then I was worried if, when I did get home, that he wouldn't know who I was. You know, being 27 and a mom and a wife and having that all almost taken away from me. It's scary, and if a vaccine can prevent that from happening, why not? Get your vaccine. I don't want this to happen to anybody else.
A message from the staff of Michigan's Crime Victim Compensation Program.
Anyone can be a victim of crime
and suffer lasting trauma, physically, emotionally, and financially.
But you are not alone.
If you're struggling financially due to a crime,
we're here
for you.
Find out if you qualify for crime victim compensation.
Call 877-251-7373 or visit michigan.gov/crime-victim.
A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Victim Services.
If you are struggling to afford your internet bills during the pandemic, there's a temporary government program that may be able to help. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it provides up to a $50 monthly discount on your broadband bill to qualifying households. Find more information about the program, including if you qualify and how to enroll, at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit or call toll-free at 833-511-0311.
A public service announcement from 89.3 Lakes FM. Welcome back to the Michigan Megacast. I'm Tyler Keefe. Learn more about the Michigan Megacast by visiting our website, civiccentertv.com, and clicking on our Megacast link, or just typing in civiccentertv.com/megacast. Well, last night the Pistons defeated the Charlotte Hornets 127-126, the first time in 15 matchups that the Pistons have defeated their fellow Eastern Conference team over there in Charlotte. And joining us to talk about that historic win last night after 15-game losing streak and more with the Detroit Pistons is MLive beat writer Lauren Williams. Lauren, thank you for being with us again.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate having you on. So, what were some of your key takeaways from the game last night against the Charlotte Hornets? One of the surprises, of course, was the play, especially of late, of Kelly Olynyk and the three-point shooting from the Pistons as well, and that comeback, especially the game-winning shot at the end of that game as well. This is a 15-game losing streak over the span of multiple seasons. The Pistons have been really struggling against the Hornets. What were some of your key takeaways from last night's game?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is, as you mentioned, the fact that Kelly Olynyk really turned it on Sunday night. He'd been struggling a lot since he'd come back from COVID. I mean, this is the second time, since his return in January that he scored in double figures. I mean, the last time he did that was, right when he returned in those first two games before he entered COVID protocols. But since he's returned after that, he's kind of struggled a little bit. But, he's finding his footing a little bit. He hit that game-winning shot, which we found out was his first game-winning shot in his 9-year career. But I think the other takeaway is that this was an all-around team effort. The fact that you had, at least 3 guys scoring 20 or more points. You had several players just scoring in double figures, alone. Isaiah Livers, who this was his second game in the NBA, he knocked down 2 3-pointers in the second quarter. So, you could look from top to bottom of the rotation that Coach Casey rolled out last night and see that, almost everyone had an impact on the offensive end. Defensively, they were really good. The last 2 times they played the Hornets this season, they put up 140 or more points on them. The fact that they cut them under that, I think, is progress. And it shows that this team is learning. They are developing. They still have a ways to go, but we're seeing that they have, the right foundational pieces that, can really make this a perennial champion.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're holding LaMelo Ball to under 20 points, defensively, you're doing something right. Of course, I mean, you had 30 points plus for Terry Rozier and almost 30 for Miles Bridges. But as you said, great numbers for the Pistons. 4 guys in double figures, 3 of which scored 20 points or more. Of course, Saddiq Bey and Jeremy Grant, the highest scorers of those 3 over 20, 26 from Jeremy Grant, 28 from Saddiq Bey. This is just one of many pretty impressive wins over the last 10 games against some formidable opponents. Charlotte's a team that's a playoff team. You have other contenders like Cleveland that they defeated recently, the Boston Celtics as well. It seems like for those key young guys, that young core for the Pistons, particularly I'm looking at guys like Saddiq Bey and Isaiah Stewart, Bey especially, it seems like they've taken another pretty significant step forward of late, going into the All-Star break and certainly now after the All-Star break. What seems to be different with this team post-All-Star break, knowing that it's not going to be a playoff team, it's going to be a team that continues to struggle, but these young guys, really that hope is that they're taking that step forward?
Oh, absolutely. I think, Coach Casey said it best in that first practice we met with him after the All-Star break, that he wanted his team to be locked in and he wanted them to kind of understand what exactly it is and where exactly they needed to improve. And so I think one of the key things that we've seen with, as you mentioned, Saddiq Bey, he's continuing to build off of, his offensive growth and the fact that he's able to not only take shots from outside, but he also can take it to the basket and draw contact. I think one of the things that we've also seen with Isaiah Stewart that doesn't often show up on the stat sheet is his ability to set those screens. I mean, Cade has benefited from it. We've seen Corey Joseph benefited from it. We've seen just a lot of the team's guards benefit from it. Obviously, I think one of the key things that Isaiah will work on this offseason is probably his outside shooting, which Coach Casey said the team had taken a step back from just because they wanted him to focus on that day job. And I mean, he's focusing on it pretty well. So I think we're seeing that this team is paying attention to where they need to grow. And, it's only going to go up from here.
Of course, at the trade deadline, the Pistons made a really interesting move. They were able to acquire a young guy that's been struggling of late, hasn't played much this season because of conflicts with the Sacramento Kings and other issues as well. And Marvin Bagley, the third, picked up at the trade deadline. Josh Jackson, some other pieces dealt to the Sacramento Kings in exchange. And we haven't seen a whole lot of Marvin Bagley just yet, but what we have seen of him seems to be more of that Marvin Bagley of old, kind of more along the lines, not quite as impressive necessarily as you would be hoping for a guy that was a top 5 draft pick just years ago and was so impressive in the college ranks, but more along those lines than before. For Marvin himself, what in your discussions with him and your colleagues' discussions with him since he's arrived in Detroit has sort of made that change for him philosophically and just the way he feels in the locker room in Detroit with this opportunity versus the last couple of years in Sacramento?
I think it's kind of one of those situations where it's a simple change of scenery. And we've seen so many times that Troy Weaver likes to take a chance on a guy who some people might consider a reclamation project. He did it with Josh Jackson, and unfortunately for Josh Jackson, that didn't work out. And now he's in Sacramento. We kind of saw it a little bit with Trey Lyles, and, he ended up being a valuable piece that they could trade to the Sacramento Kings in that 4-team trade. So I think, with Marvin Bagley, we're seeing him already kind of take this opportunity by the horns, so to speak. I also think the fact that this team is made up of guys who are of similar age to him. His point guard is going to be a similar age to him, if not younger. Between Killian Hayes or Cade Cunningham, those guys are both 20. So he fits the timeline that the Pistons want in terms of this rebuild. He provides them that athletic big that they've been lacking much of this season. I think with Bagley, the biggest thing that has stood out to a lot of people is his defense. And, while it's not that people are saying that he's an incompetent defender, but he just has room to grow in that area. And we've seen a few flashes of it here and there. So I think Coach Casey and the fact that this team is a defensive-minded team might be the best fit for him to see that area of growth.
Yeah, we're seeing more of a return to form statistically also for him. Not playing as many minutes as he did at the height of his time in Sacramento, but still 11.5 points is his current average with the Detroit Pistons. Shooting pretty well from the field, 52.6% from the field. His three-point percentage still very low, but he wasn't much of a three-point shooter previously either. And so seeing some progress from Marvin Bagley III, and knowing that for the Pistons going forward, this is an opportunity to either develop a young guy with high potential into another piece to add into that young core going forward with this rebuild, but also it's coming at a very low risk because his contract's quite favorable, even depending on what success he has throughout the rest of the year that will affect his option.
Exactly. I mean, I believe his option is $7.3 million. If he doesn't meet the criteria that's set out for him, whether that's, I think, 4,000 minutes by the end of the season or 41 games started. I mean, there are only 21 games left in this season. So we know that he's not really going to meet that criteria yet. But again, his upside is just so high. The fact that he's only 22. I think the only thing that might hurt him a little bit is his injury history. I mean, he's only played 4 games with the Pistons, and he's already out for one of those for his 5th game and with this team with an ankle injury. So time will tell if we'll see him tomorrow when they face the Wizards, when they'll really, really need him, especially with Gafford and Thomas Bryant and a couple of the other bigs that they have on that team. So, I think that's one thing that we're going to have to keep an eye on is that injury history and if it does have an impact on him here, as well as mentioned, whether he can get up to speed quickly defensively.
Yeah, he's only played over at least half a season or more twice in his career. His rookie season, 62 games and 43 games with Sacramento in his 3rd season. We're joined by Lauren Williams, Pistons beat writer with MLive Media Group, joining us on the Megacast. Looking forward, still a lot of young talent on the Pistons, players playing very impressively in their roles, especially in their more starring roles, guys like Cade Cunningham, Sadiq Bey, Isaiah Stewart, we've talked about them, but those role players also down the line also being pretty impressive in their own way. Of course, we've talked numerous times about the progress of Killian Hayes and where that kind of project of a prospect for the Pistons might be going forward. But other guys down the line also that decisions are going to need to be made on pretty soon include Hamidou Diallo, who's had a very impressive season off the bench for the Pistons. Also, where do you see the future of these guys in Detroit? Where does the Pistons organization see these guys incorporated into their future, if at all?
Yeah, I think, one of the benefits of this team this year is that they have a lot of cap space going into this offseason now that Blake Griffin's contract is off of the books. It'll allow them to be a lot more competitive in terms of who they target this offseason. But I think a lot of that money might be spent on trying to retain guys like Frank Jackson and Hamidou Diallo, who, have benefited from the playing time that they get with this team. Both of them are spark plugs off the bench. They're both guys that Troy Weaver brought in. And I don't see any reason why they wouldn't want to try and keep them around, especially because they are, as I mentioned, those spark plugs off of the bench. I mean, Hamidou Diallo, we've seen him time and time again kind of help change the pace of the game, the course of the game with his just electricity when he comes off the bench. And he's a type of guy that the team wants to keep around because he doesn't care what his role on this team is. He just wants to be an impact player. And I think they're going to need guys like that, especially because they have stars in, as you mentioned, Cade Cunningham and a rising star in Sadiq Bey.
Yeah, and right there in the same age group as a lot of those guys, too, that can grow with that core. 23 years old for Hamidou Diallo. We're joined by Lauren Williams, Pistons beat writer with MLive. Joining us on the Megacast, of course, the Pistons destined for another lottery selection this year. Very likely going to be in the higher end of those lottery odds, top 5, certainly potentially top 3 once again. The guys at the top of the board that are being looked at this point in time, Paolo Banchero from Duke, Jabari Smith Jr. of Auburn, and Chet Holmgren, of course, the number 1 guy on that board at this time from Gonzaga. Other guys that are kind of down the line also that may garner some interest from the Pistons would be someone like Jaden Ivey from Purdue. Where do you see at this moment in time, given the play of the young core for this Pistons team, some of those holes that are needed in their starting lineup and in their depth as well, where do you see at this point in time the direction the Pistons are looking as we're approaching the draft lottery over the summer and then the draft?
I think just because of where they are development-wise and talent-wise, they're going to go in a similar direction that they did last season or last offseason, where they just took the best guy in the draft. They're at a point where they can't really say, I want this position or that position. I think they're just going to try and find the best person who can provide them with the versatility that they like to see, because that's something that they prioritize. And it'll definitely affect the decisions they make going forward as to, you know, some of the veteran guys that they keep around. But I think at the top of, or at the end of the day, they want to get somebody who is the best guy. And if that means that's Paolo or Jabari or Chet Holmgren, then that's who they're going to go for.
Yeah, best player available, often the best route available for a team that's struggling but rebuilding and has some direction and has some promise. Lauren, just another minute before we'll say goodbye today. Anything else that you're working on right now in terms of stories for the Pistons that maybe we're not hearing a whole lot about from behind the scenes that would be interesting for our audience to keep an eye on at mlive.com?
Not particularly right now, just because of, you know, the direction that this season is. And, you know, I think a lot of the stuff that we'll be focusing coming up is that draft content and finding out which, as you said, might be the best fit depending on where they fall, whether that's 1, 2, or 3, because of right now being the second worst team in the league. So we'll just keep an eye on that and we'll go from there.
And you can keep an eye on it with Lauren on the website at mlive.com/Pistons to read all of her articles. Lauren, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Again, more of her articles and other Pistons and Detroit sports content on mlive.com. mlive.com/Pistons for everything you need to know to keep up to date on the Detroit Pistons basketball team. Big thank you to Lauren Williams from MLive for joining us on today's show, as well as our other guests, Eugene Budarenko, a professor at the University of Michigan, specializing in Ukrainian and Slavic languages and literature. Dave Dulio, professor of political science at Oakland University and director of its Center for Civic Engagement. Paul Kubitschek, also a professor of political science at Oakland University, as well as a professor of international studies. And Senator Mallory McMorrow, a Democrat from Michigan's 13th district, representing Royal Oak. You can find all those interviews on demand sometime mid to late afternoon today on civiccentertv.com/megacast. In addition, on our Megacast page, you'll find information about all of our partnering television, radio, and other media outlets as well, so you can keep up to date on everything that they do in the 22 hours of the day, Monday through Friday, as well as over the weekends when they're not with us here on the Megacast. You can also go to our website, civiccentertv.com. Click on our coronavirus link for up-to-date information linked to the CDC, the MDHHS, and the Oakland County Health Division so that you can stay up to date on everything you need to know about COVID-19 as we continue to weave through the mystery of this pandemic and hopefully soon come to an end of it. And, of course, keep up to date on all of our top stories on the COVID front and beyond, civiccentertv.com/coronavirus. Big thank you to our crew for making this show possible every single day. Calvin Brown, our technical director here in the studio with me, pushing all the buttons, making sure we're staying on the air and doing so smoothly. Larry Nyland, the king of television himself, our producer, making sure that we have a full show, full program for you each and every day. Jared Clark, our Zoom producer at the office of My Michigan TV in Troy, for helping all of our guests get on Zoom and take all those technical issues in stride and hopefully have a smooth experience with us on the Megacast. And, of course, Maddie Mushkin out at Master Control, helping us both on and off the air. On My Michigan TV, Steve Lato Live is coming up next, followed by Larry and Maddie Live. We will return tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Keeping Greater West Bloomfield connected during the coronavirus pandemic.